My name is Hugh Edwards, and I'm here to warn people against a serious attack which is being made at the moment on trade economics. I'm quackbusting gravity denial. What do I mean by gravity denial? Well, here is a report that recently reached the headlines in the British national press. It's from a series of what used to be called the Economists for Brexit. They are now calling themselves the Economists For Free Trade, led by Patrick Minford. They're attacking a series of economic articles and studies which were done last year and since the Brexit vote, which have shown effectively the importance of Britain's trade with Europe. They're classifying this as Project Fear, and they come up with some alternative numbers, which they call Project Prosperity. Now, what they call Project Fear is based upon the standard best practice, in a sense, in international trade policy modelling. It's called the gravity model. And this is based upon Newton's law of gravity, but it was adapted by Jan Tinbergen some 60 years ago. So the idea is that trade between any two countries is rather akin in its behaviour to the gravitational pull between different bodies in the solar system. If you can imagine Great Britain and France a bit as if they're planets, the size of trade between them depends positively upon the size of each economy and negatively upon the distance between them. Negatively because higher distance implies greater friction, greater costs of trade. We will obviously trade more with a larger country which is near us than a smaller one like Belgium. But if we're comparing one country which is near and an even larger country which is further away, the comparison is more difficult, and it involves a lot of effectively econometric work. So what we do is we convert this into what we call an econometric model, and effectively we write it down. We take logs in order to model the trade. So log of trade between I and J equals A plus B times log of the GDP. GDP is a measure of the size of a country. Depends negatively in some way or other upon distance between the two countries, and also depends negatively upon tariffs, we would expect, and there'll be a lot of other factors which are involved. This sort of model is estimated these days on what we call a panel database of trade between country pairs for a large number of countries across a large number of years, taking account of a load of different economic factors, and the results are generally seen as pretty robust. Now, this has been criticised by the Economists for Brexit. They argue, they now call themselves Economists for Free Trade, they argue that this model is biased in terms of effectively called the Economists for Free Trade, or Minford. They say it's biased in favour of trade with nearby countries like the EU, and it underestimates the potential for trade with further away countries like China. They prefer a model based upon the old idea of a single world traded price, and in a sense what they say is the law of comparative advantage. Now the problem with this argument, they're effectively setting up a false dichotomy between trade theory and trade empirics. If you look in the last 30 years at the trade theory literature and at the trade empirical literature, the two are increasingly converging. Theory papers have lots of empirical applications. Empirical papers are based in many ways upon theory. The two are no longer as far apart. The second thing is that when we come to the standard view, the current view on trade theory, which comes from two very important guys these days, Kostas Akalakis and Arno Kostino. They look at a whole variety of different theory-based models of trade, all of which are consistent with the law of comparative advantage, and they show that every single one can be written in terms of this gravity equation. Every single one. What this means is, of course, you can't actually distinguish between the underlying theoretical model just from looking at the gravity equation, but equally importantly, the policy implications of a series of tariff changes, for example, switching tariffs, reducing tariffs, let's say on New Zealand while increasing them on the EU. The policy implications of any set of those things can be assessed regardless of the theory which is underlying. All that matters are these estimated coefficients of the gravity equation. Now, this is today's top trade theorists saying all theory is consistent with this model. The theory itself cannot tell you what the welfare implications of a trade are. It's not prejudiced about this. The answer comes, it has to lie in the data, and it can be found by fitting a gravity equation. So when Patrick Minford and his friends try to say we should ignore the gravity model because it is purely empirical, we should stick to theory, and theory can tell us what the results are, he is diametrically wrong. He is wrong according to today's trade theorists. He is literally 30 to 40 years out of date, which I think is a sign of age, much as I am aging myself. Now, another important implication of this is that actually Patrick Minford may say, well, I'm using a model which is an alternative to the gravity model. He isn't. He may not know this, but he and his own team are actually applying a version of the gravity model. Because the gravity model doesn't say how big A, B, C, D, E, and so on are. It doesn't necessarily say how much trade declines with distance or how much it declines with tariff. This is something which we actually observe and we fit with the data, and there's no theory, there's no credible modern theory which stands and says necessarily any particular values have to apply to these. What Patrick Minford has done, effectively, is he has fitted a gravity model, but where this distance is affected, he says distance has no effect. Well, that is saying that when you estimate the model, the coefficient on distance should be approximately 0. He's also saying that trade is incredibly sensitive to price. This means E here should be very large, and I'm talking about a number, an elasticity perhaps 20 plus, maybe 100. In the extreme model he's got, it will be infinite. I don't think that's important. But this is an empirical question. Is this naught? Is this very large? Well, the answer we get when we take it to the data is emphatically no, this is not naught, it's about 1. And no, this is not very large. When you look at a meta-analysis of the main studies which have been done, it usually comes out at about 5. A model with these coefficient values in is not going to give you the type of results which you get from Project Fear. Sorry, Project Prosperity. Oh, it's not Project Prosperity, is it? It's Project Delusion. So Project Delusion, Patrick Minford's version, is based upon imposing wrong values on a model which he could have estimated. But if he'd estimated it, he would have known that the model, the assumptions he was making, are wrong. So what is the best response we can make to this? Well, first of all, he has drawn a false dichotomy between trade theorists and trade practitioners. He doesn't understand what he's doing. Secondly, he has wrongly appealed to trade theory for overwriting the results of empirics. That is not sustainable. And thirdly, he has produced a series of numbers, policy simulation numbers, his Project Delusion. What is the best response we can make to these numbers? Well, frankly, when somebody is denying an overall model when in fact they're simply imposing their own parameter values on it, we have to say their results are garbage in, garbage out. So this comes to the fun bit. What do I think people should do with Patrick Minford's report? Bye.